Hello there, Super Dungeon Explorers. My name is Kaiju, and today I'll be teaching you how to play Super Dungeon Explorer's new Arcade Mode. Arcade Mode is a fully cooperative game mode where players can take on monsters that are automated. They are not controlled by another player. So you guys can coordinate, cooperate, and take down a dungeon without anyone having to be the bad guy. So the first thing we're going to need when we set up a game of arcade, just like in normal Super Dungeon Explorer, is how many heroes are going to enter the dungeon. Super Dungeon Explorer has a lot of heroes to choose from, and you can play between 3 and 5 heroes officially. So for this example, we're going to pick 3 heroes. The number of heroes we pick will determine how many monsters spawns we're going to pick, mini bosses, tiles, treasures, and wrath tokens, and various other things. So let's just do it step by step. First thing we're going to need are to determine the spawn cards. Now, if you have a big collection, you can have many different spawn cards to pick from. A spawn card, as you can imagine, is a card that denotes where the monster spawns from. Then in their description, they have all the monsters associated with them and all the monster cards associated with them. It's also important to note that you need to use the arcade versions of these cards. They're denoted by the purple background and the arcade cabinet in the corner. For an example, here are the classic mode cards. They have a different color background and different stats entirely, different icons and so forth. So these are the classic mode, we don't need them, set them aside. We're looking for the arcade versions. So here we have the Bramble Knight spawn. It counts as 1 spawn because right there in the description it says ×1 Bramble Knight spawn. Alright, that's 1 down. Here we have an Old Growth Hollow. Now an Old Growth Hollow counts as 2 spawns. So when we pick this as one of our spawns, we'll actually grab 2 Old Growth Hollows. And of course we'll grab all the associated cards that go with those spawns and all their appropriate models and set them off to the side in one giant spawning pool that we'll grab from when we start playing as the monsters. Next, we're going to need to grab mini bosses and our big boss. The number of mini bosses you pick is equal to the number of heroes minus 1. Typically, if you don't have the number of models to appropriate as many heroes as you have, or to compensate rather, then just pick as many as you can. Of course, up to its limit. So here we have Trent and Bashful Boris. In their corners, you can see that they're described as mini bosses. So we'll pick these 2 characters for our mini boss and put them aside. Grab their models and put them in the spawning pool. And here we have the Forgotten King. He is going to be our Chimera Dungeon boss. There aren't many bosses to pick from in Super Dungeon Explorer, so these guys are tough. So he's going to be our boss, and we'll set him off to the side. Grab his appropriate model. And here we go. The next thing we're going to need, after we determined our heroes and our monsters, is to build our appropriate decks. In Super Dungeon Explorer, there are a lot of decks that you're going to be playing with. We have the Loot deck, which is the blue background gear cards. The Treasure deck, which is the red background gear cards. The Explore deck, which is this compact green deck here that I'll explain how it works once we get into gameplay. And the Arcade deck, which is what will determine how the monsters act during gameplay. It's a compact purple deck. So during our setup, we can modify these decks in certain manners, depending if we have special promo cards and such. For instance, the Loot deck here is a standard deck. I don't have any promo cards that I can add, swap out, or do anything with. There are no special rules that let me modify this deck. So this deck will stay as is, and we'll set that off to the side. Now the Treasure deck here does get modified pretty heavily. It starts with the base 24 cards. But I also note real quick, here we have the Shadow Crown. Here it has an emblem here with the Forgotten King on it. That's a misprint. It's supposed to look like this. So when you're gathering your base 24 cards, make a mental note that the Shadow Crown belongs in that base deck. And I'll show you why in just a moment. So when we're building the treasure deck, we're going to add 6 wonders, 6 Boo Booties, and 6 model specific cards. So Super Dungeon Explorer comes with 6 booty monster cards, not the kind you're thinking of. And these are basically monstrous treasure cards. You open a treasure chest and oops, it's actually a monster. Comes with 6. I'll explain how they work when we get there, so we'll just add them to the deck. Next, we'll get pet wonders, or just wonders in general. I'm sure in future expansions of Super Dungeon Explorer there will be more wonder cards. But as you can see here, they have wonder in their description. So we'll put these all off to the side when we put away our components. But here we have 6 pet wonders, and we'll add these to the treasure deck. And then we'll get model specific cards. Because we got the Forgotten King, we'll get his 6 treasure cards. See, now does it make sense as why that Shadow Crown should be in there? Because here we already have 6. Whoop. 6. Shadow Crown was a misprint, so that's unfortunate. So here are 6 cards specific to the Forgotten King, and then here are cards specific to those mini bosses we picked, Bashful Boris and Trent. So now the players will decide which 6 do they want in the deck. So let's just say, for example, we pick these 6. We'll shuffle them in and set the last 2, put them back in the box. We don't need them. Now the treasure deck is complete, shuffle it up and set it off to the side. Now the Explorer deck comes with a base 24 cards, and these will have special abilities, special effects, things that affect players, that have traps, summon monsters. It's a bunch of stuff that happens with these decks. And when you build this deck, depending on which boss you picked, there will be 12 specific boss Explorer cards. So make sure you gather those. We got the Forgotten King and his specific cards, put them in, shuffle it up, and set it off to the side. And here we have the command deck. Command deck again, you can modify if you have special cards that let you do so, but in Forgotten King box, I don't have anything like that, so it's done. We'll set it off to the side. Alright, so now that we've got our appropriate decks, now we can start building the dungeon. So to do that, first we're going to pick a tile. Forgotten King comes with 6 lovely illustrated tiles here. So we're going to pick one of them and place it on the table. Just like that. Next, we're going to find another tile, orient it however we'd like. And we'll place it aligned with the tile we had initially placed. But hold on, we're not done here. There's an element of randomness and chance when we place these tiles. So what we're going to do is roll a d6, roll a dice, and depending on what we roll, we'll change the tile accordingly. If we roll this symbol, the heart and the potion, we're going to flip the tile entirely, keeping the same orientation that we have maintained here. So we'll flip it, align it, and place it. So here we have 2 tiles placed, and since we have 3 heroes, we're going to need 1 more. So again, we'll pick a tile, place it down connecting to one of our previously placed tiles. It could be either one. Roll the green dice, and then here I have got stars. This means that we'll rotate that tile 90 degrees for each star we've rolled, clockwise. So that means since I've rolled 2 stars, it's essentially going to do a 180. 90 degrees, 90 degrees, and there we go. Place it just like that. So now we've built our dungeon. The next thing we're going to need to do is to place our heroes. Take the star token, which looks like this. It's a power button. Boop. And we're going to place this within 4 spaces of an entryway that's not connected to a tile. So for instance, we can't place it here, or here. So in this example, I'm going to place this token, let's say, whoa, wait a minute, oh, right here. 1, 2, 3, 4, start. And then we'll place our heroes in adjacent or onto that token. So here I have the Questing Knight, Princess Emerald, and the Fey Alchemist. Fantastic. Something important to note is that this is different from Classic mode. In Classic mode, the heroes will enter the dungeon last. But in Arcade mode, they enter the dungeon first. So that's interesting. The next thing we'll do is to place our monster spawns. Now in Arcade mode, these spawns go on specific square locations that are marked with an icon. It looks like this. See, these are spawn locations that are specific for when you play Arcade mode. In Classic mode, the console is free to place them wherever you'd like. But since it's Arcade mode, we get to place these however we'd like here. But of course they must stay on the specific spawn location square. So depending on what spawn the heroes want to face first, you might decide, oh, I want to place this one here, or I want to place this one instead here. The reason being is monsters can only spawn from their specific spawn point. So once you start becoming a veteran of the game, you might know which monsters you want to face now or later. So we'll place the rest of the spawns like such, and then we get to place the treasure chest. You have a treasure chest equal to the number of heroes again. It's 3. And we're going to place this however we'd like within 5 squares of the spawn point. Wherever we'd like. Alright, well 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Let's place that right there next to the heroes. How fortunate are they? We'll place this next treasure. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Place it right there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Wait a minute. That's not allowed. There can only be 1 spawn and 1 treasure chest per tile. So let's take that back and place this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Alright. And now we're going to spawn the monsters. Remember that we grabbed all the appropriate cards associated with each of their spawns? Normally in Classic mode you can only spawn certain monsters, but in Arcade mode you spawn them all. So we're going to have to get 1 Grobit Executioner, 2 Frog Knights, and 4 Billmen. And I have the 2 cards associated with it. So the way that we place monsters next to their spawn is following a couple rules. 1. They must be placed within 2 spaces of the spawn point. 2. They can't be placed adjacent to another monster unless it's otherwise impossible. 3. They must be placed next to blessings if possible. 4. They cannot be placed in negative effect squares unless otherwise impossible. Alright, so that was quite a bit to choke down, but let's try it. So here we have the Grobit Executioner. He's a large based monster, so that means he's going to occupy a lot more squares. Although only one of those has to be within the 2 squares of his spawn point. So for example, 1, 2, I can place him right here, even though he has squares that exceed the 1, 2 limit of his spawn point. Alright, so now I'll spawn the rest of the monsters associated with the card, and that's, or with the spawn, and that's 4 Billmen and 1, 2 Frog Knights. Remember, they have to stay within 2 spaces of the spawn, and they cannot be adjacent to one another. So we'll place them as such. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Now here, I could just place this Frog Knight right there and call it a day. It'd be following all the rules, but I want to make a note of something. Frog Knights here have something called Surefoot, which means that they ignore the negative effects on tiles and treat them as open squares. Here we have Brambles, and Brambles are difficult terrain that cause poison, as denoted by this reference card. So normally, I wouldn't be able to place a monster there when spawning, but because the Frog Knight has Surefoot, he ignores those effects and treats it as open squares, so he can be placed there. And that's how you spawn monsters. That spawn is complete, and we're done with that. Now, for double spawns, the way that we spawn monsters associated to them is that we take all the cards associated with them, split them in half, and then kind of spread them out evenly as much as we can. We spread the cards in half, not the models. So in this example, I'm going to put the Herbalist and the Will-O-Wisps in one spawn right here, and the Little Sprouts and the Hungry Sprouts in the other spawn over there. So I'll grab all the appropriate models associated with those cards. Here we have 2 Turnip Heads and 2 Will-O-Wisps. I'm going to place them just like how we did the other spawn, within 2 squares and not adjacent to each other. Like that. That spawn is done. And then as for the spawn over there, we'll get all their models associated and start placing them. Set these cards off to the side. Alright. Now, something that's important to note. Here we have a shapeshift monster, King Sprout. Shapeshift monsters do not get placed on the field at the start of the game. Instead, their base model must be placed on the field. So in this case, Sprout has to be placed on the field first. King Sprout can never start on the field. And these 2 cards, or these 2 monster models, cannot exist on the same time, at the same time on the field, as long as one of them is already on the field. So since Sprout is there, King Sprout cannot be placed, and we'll keep his model in reserve. Of course, it's also just important to note for reference, mini bosses don't get placed and the boss doesn't get placed. If you're completely new to the game, that's something you should know. If you already knew that, then don't worry about it. Alright, so we've spawned all the monsters, we've set everything up properly, and we're just about ready to play the game. Each hero will start the game with 1 potion token. Potion tokens look like this, and we'll give 1 to each hero. Now, remember how I mentioned Wrath? Wrath tokens are specific to arcade mode, and these will determine which hero the monsters will want to go after. And the number of Wrath tokens we have is equal to the number of players times 2 minus 1. So in a 3-player game, we're going to have 5 Wrath tokens. So we'll set that off to the side where all the heroes can reach them, and keep them in our pool of tokens. I personally like to give each hero 3 gem tokens, and I'll explain why once we get to the player turn. It's good for reference and just handy to keep around, just in case you ever need something like this. There are also 2 reference cards in arcade mode. One is for Wrath, which are those tokens I just gave out, and these will tell you when do you get those Wrath tokens and how many do you get. And here we have the Mighty Monsters table, which will come into effect when we defeat mini bosses. For every mini boss we defeat, the monsters will get buffed. So we'll set these reference cards to the side, grab all of our appropriate tokens, our health tokens, our potion tokens, our status effect tokens, etc, etc, etc. Set them off to the side where everyone can reach them. And we'll also set this backpack card somewhere within reach of everyone. grab your dice. Oh dear. And we're ready to play Super Dungeon Explorer. It's also important to note to have Boo Booty reference cards and Creep reference cards handy for whenever they might show up in the dungeon. So set those off to the side, get your different card decks all shuffled up within reach, and now you're ready to play.